Hello, and welcome back to US History and Elections. It is the 4th of November, and we are one day before Election Day. Voting is going to start in the easternmost states in approximately 15 hours. Polls open around 7 a.m. Eastern, and we are going to finally decide who is going to be the next president of the United States. Now, this is a map I have filled out. All the safe states are already filled out. Safe states meaning the respective candidate is going to win by 15 or more points. All of the other empty states are states that are going to be won by less than 15 points, going to be putting them into categories likely, 15 to 5 point margin of victory, lean, 5 to 2 point margin of victory, and tilt, a less than 2 point margin of victory. Now, every single state is going to be categorized, and that's going to give us a final projection for my presidential predictions. Now, I just want to quickly go into the early mail-in and early in-person voting. NBC News has it as almost 76.5 million people. Just for a rough figure, Donald Trump won about 73 million votes in total in the last election. So this is at least 50% of the 2020 number. However, I think there's going to be more people turning out in 2024 than 2020. We've seen huge early voting numbers, say Georgia, say New Jersey, these sort of areas. We've been seeing big numbers across the country, and what it's shown is that this election is going to be close. 538 currently have Trump winning 53 out of times 100, Kamala 47 on their election projection modeling system, and RCP currently have Trump leading +1 in the top battlegrounds. However, that is kind of outweighted by Arizona. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot closer, probably close to about +4. So that is well within the margin of error. If Trump's only leading by 0.8 and the average margin of error in a poll is 3.5 points, then we're talking about a really close election, and that is what we're going to see. We've seen a bit of a vibe shift in the last week back towards Kamala Harris when she had that huge polling and a vibe sort of lead back in September. Trump seemed to claw some back with some good polls throughout the middle of the month of October. However, the last week has been very good for Harris. The weekend, specifically, and pretty much we'd always been in a 50-50 race. And this is why it's going to be so hard to do predictions this year, because people don't know whether to trust the polls. But I'm going to give you my prediction not only based on polls, but just based on historical trends, the economy, all of these things. There's so many factors that factor into my predictions, and it's why I had such a good rate in 2020. Now we're going to start off with the likely Democratic states. Realistically, most of these are not going to be competitive, but I just want to put them in here. And this is Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, Minnesota, Virginia, New Jersey, New Hampshire, and Maine at large. I think that's them all. Okay. I don't really want to go into much of them because pretty much all of these races are going to be won by Kamala by over 5 points. There's not really much to talk about unless we are talking about a huge election win for the former president, which doesn't seem to be much of a chance. Same with, I don't see much of a chance of Kamala picking up any of the likely Republican states I'm going to be putting in. But maybe quickly to mention that if you're watching the election results tomorrow, keep a close eye out for New Hampshire and Virginia. If there is that surprise red wave that apparently was going to happen in 2022, didn't turn out that way. But, if we're going to be seeing a lot longer for the results to come out in New Hampshire and in Virginia. Biden had Virginia called for him about 30 minutes, an hour after the polls closed in Virginia. Hillary Clinton had to wait until about 11, so about 3.5 hours for Virginia to be called. That was the sign that it wasn't going to be as rosy as she thought it was going to be going into an election night. So New Hampshire and Virginia, we want to keep a close eye on that, how quickly we're getting the numbers out of there. If there's a big lead for one of the candidates, or, in Virginia, if it's really close in Virginia, it's going to be a long night. And if it's a big lead, bigger than Joe Biden's lead in Virginia, then Kamala Harris is doing very well and hitting that 2020 benchmark. But now I want to go back onto the Republican side, fill out their likely Republican states. That's going to be Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska's 1st congressional district, Alaska, South Carolina, Florida, Maine's 2nd congressional district, and Ohio. Now, there's a few states I've left out, which I'll go into, but these are the states that I think Donald Trump's going to be winning by more than 5 points in. Most of them we don't really have to go into. One I do want to go into is you've seen I've characterized Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri as likely. Missouri's not going to be that close because it's been going more Republican in the last 15, 20 years, and that's just a continuation of a trend. However, Nebraska's third congressional district and Kansas only being in the likely is something a bit worrying for the Republicans. If I was going to be honest, we've seen a lot of the polling that has come out. I'm going to cover Iowa and why that I've left that blank for the moment. But pretty much the whole of the Midwest, the Great Plains region, we're talking Nebraska, we're talking South Dakota, Iowa, Missouri, up into southwestern Wisconsin, we're talking about the Driftless region. These are the sort of areas that Donald Trump did pretty well in 2016, did pretty well in 2020. 2022 he had a bit of a slip. And 2024, there's a lot of ballot measures in these sort of places. We saw the Dems win the Kansas governor election. Of course, I don't really want to compare governor to a federal election, but that's something to keep an eye on. Nebraska, of course, we have the really, really competitive Senate race that no one saw coming. And Iowa, I'm going to get onto that into a second, but I just want to say the Midwest is probably one of the weaker parts for Trump, where he has actually gained a lot in the Sun Belt. Not so much in Iowa, and not so much in Nebraska, and not so much as Kansas. All the other states I don't really need to go into. Florida trending that way. Alaska always been pretty close, and Trump isn't that popular in Alaska, but the ranked choice voting will make sure that he wins that. Not really anything else I want to go into there, so we're going to go back to the Democratic side. And I'm going to be putting the lean states here, and this is going to be Michigan and Pennsylvania. So Michigan, I just want to quickly talk about. There's been a lot of talk about in Michigan that the Democrats are going to surprisingly struggle here. A lot of talk of the Arab Americans. That is something big to keep in sight of. But simply, I just don't think it's going to be that big of a case because most of them are not going to vote for Trump. I'm going to tell you that right now. They're either going to vote for Jill Stein or they're just not going to vote for the president, whether that means not voting at all, whether that means just keeping that section blank and then going down the down ballot things. I just don't think Trump has a really good base with the Arab Americans. You've seen he's gone to Michigan and he's done a few rallies there in the areas such as Dearborn, where there is such a high Arab American population. But simply the numbers just don't exist for him in all the polls, because we don't look at singular ones, we like to look at the trends. But the trends show that Donald Trump is struggling with Arab Americans, even though the Arab Americans are struggling to go and vote for Kamala Harris. Trump is simply not picking up those voters. And the increase in women for the Democratic Party over the last couple of years since the Dobbs decision, which is, I believe, is going to play a much bigger role than some people are thinking. It's going to be the second most important second most important issue for voters this election. Mark my word, it will be more important than immigration, because abortion has affected people all over America. Immigration has, of course, as well, especially with the busing of migrants to other cities. But we are going to see a lot of the states that have abortion ballot measures, aka Arizona, aka Iowa, aka Florida, we're going to see something in that way. And some of the more red states, it's not going to matter as much, but in some of the more purple states, that's going to play a big point into showing where we're going to see these shifts. Now on to Pennsylvania. I've been saying a whole long time that Pennsylvania is going to be the bellwether state. And in this election and in this projection, I am putting it more left than Wisconsin. Now, that's also more to do with Wisconsin and how perfectly balanced it is politically along political lines. But Pennsylvania, one thing that, because I do see there's a pathway to Trump winning this, but there's also a clearer path to Harris winning it. And one thing that doesn't help is the Puerto Rico thing. The Puerto Rico comment last weekend by Tony Hinchcliffe, that was kind of the beginning of the vibe shift towards Kamala Harris. We've seen, the betting numbers dropping massively. Polymarket had Trump about 67% to win there. It's now down to about 55%, and the Margaret base have been, pretty much showing Polymarket as a sign of their narrative being in the ascendancy. If they want to use that again, then their narrative is certainly most not in the ascendancy. 500,000 Puerto Rican Americans in Pennsylvania, that could be a huge margin. And also we want to see the Polish Americans, how they're doing in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to be honest, there's a lot of polls coming out that are straight up ties in Pennsylvania. And I do see Bob Casey actually outperforming Kamala Harris here, but I think Kamala Harris can pull out a 2-point victory in the state. And if they do that, then they've got 2 of the 3 key states that they have to win, in the blue wall for a path to victory. Now I'm going to be moving back over to the Republicans, going to be characterizing the lean states for them: Texas, Iowa, and Arizona. Now, Texas, just trending blue, a lot more blue into the purple column that it has. I think the Senate race with Ted Cruz is going to be closer than the presidential race, just because I do think there's been the Latino population in Texas is not going to be shifting, is going to be shifting more red than the rest of the country as a whole from the actual different subsets of Latinos. We're talking about Cubans, Mexicans, Venezuelans, Puerto Ricans. All these people come under one big balloon that is Latino vote. However, in Texas, I'd say it's a lot more favorable in the areas that Donald Trump seems to be doing better with, Florida and Texas. Those are Latino voters that he has improved a little bit better with than other Latinos. Now, Arizona is the same thinking. Arizona, of course, we've got a Senate race where the Democrat is favored to win, and I do believe he's going to win. And I think there's going to be a lot of ticket splitters. There's going to be a lot of people that vote for Donald Trump and a lot of people that vote for Ruben Gallego. Now, it's really interesting to say that because Biden very, very narrowly won Arizona, and it was always a target and is always trending blue. And I think in some of the in the Senate elections, in the House elections, I think the Democrats are going to do better than they did in 2020 here, better than they did in 2022 as well. But at the presidential level, I think Trump has a good base that he's garnered in 2024. He's not Kari Lake, simple as. Even though they do have a fairly, even though Kari Lake has pretty much tried to imitate Trump, both policy-wise and demeanor rhetoric-wise, she simply is not Donald Trump. Simply no other Republican candidate. Ron DeSantis tried that, it didn't work for him. And Kari Lake tried it in 2022, lost to Katie Hobbs. Simply, I don't see Katie Hobbs being that much of a factor in Donald Trump winning this state. I think it's going to be the most solidly Republican of the 7 key swing states, but a key one to watch. I wouldn't count the Democrats out of it, but I'd say this is definitely their hardest chance to hold on to a seat, hold on to a state in the electoral map. Now we're going to be going back to we're going to stay with the Republicans, and I'll just fill in the tilt seats so you have an idea of who I am projecting. I think Georgia's going to be tilt Republican, and that is it. I think the Democrats are going to win Nevada by a tilt margin, Wisconsin by a tilt margin, and North Carolina by a tilt margin, giving them 292 electoral votes to Trump's 246. Now I'm going to quickly talk about Georgia, and then I'm going to go into the other swing states that I've characterized as the tilt margins. Again, tilt margins I do pretty much see as toss-ups. I think Trump could easily go Wisconsin, North Carolina as well, and then he gets a victory by 278 to 260. But I would say these 3 states do lean to the Democrats at the moment. So Georgia, Biden won it by 11,000 votes, a minuscule margin, and it took for ages to come out with that. Fortunately, Georgia has changed their election rules a bit, and we're going to find out what's happening in Georgia rather quickly, unless it is just that close again, but we're going to be finding out way quicker than it took in 2020. Now, Georgia was the freak result. No one was saying consensus-wise that Biden was going to win this. Even if you were looking at the polling numbers, which were pretty strong for him across the swing states in 2020, Biden winning Georgia was the big surprise of the night, and also just Donald Trump overperforming as a whole. But yeah, Georgia was the big surprise, and realistically, I think it's going to be very hard to hold on to. I think 2022, the Dems managed to hold on to it with the Senate race when people thought Herschel Walker was going to win that. But I'm not seeing the early numbers in turnout, and it's all going to be in the rural areas. We've seen that the early votes in Georgia have been huge record-breaking numbers from both sides, particularly the rural votes, but the urban counties and the suburban counties surrounding the Atlanta metro area have started to come out closer to their 2020 numbers, and therefore going to make this race rather competitive when people were thinking at the start it may not be so. But again, the way the Democrats win this is by getting out the rural black vote, which they have actually struggled with big time. People have always been talking about the black vote Donald Trump's going to win the highest margin of Republican votes with black voters for 50 plus years now. And I think he is, just because the vibes in the rural areas, the just general rural to urban divide between the Republican and Democratic parties is big. It's a big shift. And I think the Democrats are going to struggle to win Georgia. However, North Carolina, I think they're going to narrowly, and I'm talking about half a percentage point here, get over the finish line in flipping one state that they didn't win in 2020 out of all the big swing states this cycle. And I think it's going to be very much down to a good campaign in some hurricane affected areas. I think that's going to have an impact on the election, a rather minimal one, because I think the main impact on this election is just the fact of how unpopular Mark Robinson is in the governor race. So we've seen the average poll now is Mark Robinson down by 15 points. That's just a fact. Josh Stein at about 55%, Mark Robinson below 40%. And that is just unacceptable in a swing state, in a purple state. If the Democratic candidate is going to win by 15 plus points, and I'd expect it's going to be a bit closer, but it's going to be a double-digit margin that Josh Stein eventually wins by in North Carolina for the governor's race. He's going to have to rely on a lot of people voting Josh Stein and Donald Trump, and I just do not simply think that there's that many ticket splitters. And it's going to be really close. There could just be enough that Donald Trump does win this by a point. Could be enough for the Democrats that they win it by half a point. And it's always been a target for the Democrats. Obama won it in 2008. They haven't won it since. But I do see the path to victory for Kamala Harris in North Carolina, an extremely narrow path. But if they're hitting and they have the urban black turnout like they need and keep up a decent number in the rurals, not being blown out 80 to 20, getting that closer to 70 to 30 in a lot of these rural counties outside of the urban areas, then that is the path to victory for Kamala Harris in North Carolina. We're going to go back west now, Nevada. Always the state that the Democrats just about managed to win, almost the opposite of North Carolina, considering Republicans always just managed to win North Carolina. However, Nevada, we've seen a lot of talk about the early votes, and I think we're going to get a bit of an idea how the mail-in votes, because all early in-person voting, is done. And this is pretty much how the Republicans had their 4-point advantage. I want to go quickly back onto NBC. Currently, they have a 4% advantage from all early voting, whether that be in person, whether that be by mail. They have a 4% advantage now. In 2020, the Democrats had that advantage, and it was fairly big. It was fairly sizable. But this is similar. The trend that we have seen there is a lot more similar to 2022, when Dems narrowly won, than to 2020, and a lot more comparable as well. 2020, in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, Democrats, heavily favored mail voting and just early voting in general. Republicans, avoided it like the plague. At least that's what you were hearing from the main Republican leaders. And therefore, I think Nevada is still in play for Democrats. We still do not really know what the election day numbers are going to be like. If the election day numbers are anywhere like 2020, Democrats can say goodbye to Nevada. But if it is true, and you want to believe the idea that it is closer to 2022 and Republicans have actually been eating into their 2020 election day voting numbers and, margin that they were winning that by, then the Democrats are in play there. And apparently, according to historical trends and expert opinions on Nevada, the independents in Nevada tend to be younger and therefore tend to support Democratic candidates more likely. But Nevada's going to be close. Don't get out of your mind. It's going to be 1 point for one candidate either way, I believe. And that kind of leads us on to Wisconsin, the state that is always way off the mark when it comes to polling. 2016, it was massive. 2020, it was the biggest one. It was like 6 points. They were saying Biden was going to win this by 6 points. I never really listened to that. Biden won it by less than a point. And simply, Wisconsin is that hard to call. It is, in my opinion, the hardest one to call. And I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if Kamala wins North Carolina and Nevada, but then Trump comes and breaks up the blue wall, even though it's not happened in a long time, and wins Wisconsin. Simply, of course, in this scenario, that wouldn't actually matter that much, but simply it is just that close. I'm looking for places like Door County, that little peninsula jutting out in between Lake Michigan and Green Bay, because it's a bellwether county, but Wisconsin, the ballot's going to take a while to come in. We're really not going to be knowing Wisconsin because fact is it's going to be tight. No candidate is winning this more than 2.5 points, in my opinion. Either way, if there's a Trump electoral college blowout win, he's not winning Wisconsin by more than 2.5. If Kamala Harris wins a electoral college blowout win, she's not winning it more than by more than 2.5 points. So just to keep an eye on, those are my 4 states that I think are going to be really close: Nevada, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Georgia. But this is my final prediction: Kamala Harris becoming the 47th president of the United States with 292 electoral college votes, and Trump only getting 246. Now I'm going to be doing a few more update videos. If you want to follow that to see how the results are going, hopefully we don't have a 2020 example where we don't find out until the weekend. Hopefully we find out by Wednesday, if not by Thursday. And, just to make sure that this process is not as messy and as violent as it turned out in 2020. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you all again very soon.